many people. Okay, okay. So, welcome to our last panel, panel 4, which has 3 speakers that we already know from other gatherings we've had. We will have Nuria Sánchez Madrid, Igor Cvejić, and Andrea Perenovic. And we'll start with Nuria Sánchez Madrid, who is a co-owner of this gathering, and as a professor in the Universidad Complutense Madrid, whose title is Transformations of Labor and Institutional Distrust in Contemporary Spain. So, Nuria, when you want, thank you very much.
Thank you, Clara. I would like to share my screen and to show you the short PowerPoint I prepare for this presentation. Are you seeing well the presentation? Yes? Okay, my aim with this presentation was mainly to try to focus on some sources of transformation of democratic public institutions stemming from the experiences of contradiction, but also of systematicity regarding with labor spaces, work spaces. I would like to dissect in some way how the space of work is useful, is helpful to inspire some transformations of our current interaction with especially public institutions. I will try to speak within this 20 minutes, but if I consume all my time, I continue to speak. Please, Clara, make me know through the chat, for example. First, I would like to focus as opening words, really, in what I see as some quite entangled institutional response to what is a high segmented job market, as is the Spanish job market. I think in generally in South Europe, this is a common problem, this segmentation, fragmentation of the typologies of employment, for example. And so I would like to first highlight on some key labor reforms driven in Spain, which explain the genealogy of temporary employment regulation in this country. For example, in 1977, when democracy came back to my country, in the Moncloa deal, temporary employment as a category, as a concept, was approved by trade unions and by the government, naturally. In 1982, with the National Employment Agreement, trade unions, the Spanish trade unions, accepted for the first time short-time jobs and precarious employments as an instrument to reduce, to struggle with unemployment. I think this is a very ideological change, transformation of the negotiation between trade unions and government in Spain. And finally, in 1997, with the Interconfederal Employment Agreement, the typologies of legitimate dismissal, of flexible layoffs, really, was definitively enlarged. After this date, we experienced in Spain a transformation of these deep changes of what does it mean to have a job, what does it mean, what basic rights entails to be a worker in Spain. If we assess the increase of part-time jobs in Spain in the last decades, for example, in the Spanish labor force survey last year, we obtained the data that 15% of workers in Spain have short-time, part-time works. Also, a very important, significant percentage of people, according to this labor force survey, have non-standard jobs or bullshit jobs. Since the economic crisis from 2008 to 2013 as the main years influenced by this crisis and all the impact that these situations meant for the job market in Spain. Since this crisis, especially since this crisis, we call highlight the deep impact that these part-time jobs had among women, especially immigrant women, especially caregivers, also men, but the percentage of women is still dominant in this section, and also gig economy actors. The gig economy, this short-term conception of employment, which concerns especially artistic activities. If we pay attention to what I call the cultural political clash about the social implications of this kind of employment, short-term or part-time employment, the pro-arguments practically always focus on the conciliation that this kind of employment allows between family care and private life. And also, this kind of arguments underscore that this kind of employment is a sort of step, easing the subject to upgrade to full-time work. Naturally, there are many fallacies inside, but these are arguments very present, very dominant in the neoliberal ideology that normally influences the political agenda. Contra-arguments against these part-time works. They have low wages, they entail low wages, labor precarity, difficulties to receive sick pay and private health care, and they experience the subjects under these part-time jobs, they experience a general waning of training and opportunities for developing their capacities. Another point, how to correctly assess the impact of part-time jobs, for example, in a country as Spain, I will say in all South Europe. I think our intersectional approach will be very useful to endeavor this task, because the intertwinement between this kind of work, the class, usually these people are immigrants, the race, but also the gender. Most people accepting this kind of job are women. So I would say that this intersectional approach is completely necessary to develop a systematic survey of what this part-time job means for Spanish society, for example. The last point of this first part, which is the hermeneutical framework underpinning the institutional support given to labor precarity. I think, and I would like to highlight this, that the mimesis of full-time work still appears as the only path, the only useful path for guaranteeing labor social justice to this kind of workers. I would like to discuss this ideological pattern, why to transform, why to understand non-standard work only under the figure, the goals, the norms of full-time work. Second section or second step, institutions are social fact, as we know, as we call see, as we call a track in philosophers as Deleuze. Institutions are created through or from tendencies as sexuality develops institution as marriage, or greed make it possible an institution as property. But naturally, neither marriage nor property are necessary paths to give satisfaction to these tendencies. So naturally, from this approach of the less, we might understand, we might cast light over the fact that institutions are always created, are always understood as a process of making, which involves social actions and social habits. If we pay attention, for example, to the approach that Searle, in his book about the social, the making of social reality, if we pay attention to Searle's distinction between physical facts and social facts, I would like to underscore in the wake of Cvejić's well-known article about what does it mean to be a good institution, I would like to highlight that according to Searle, institutions are ontological subjective, but epistemically objective, as collective intentional facts. So, without forgetting Deleuze's approach, Searle helps us to grasp the fact that to join and to recognize an institution is something that we naturalize, we experience a kind of sort of getting acquainted to the norms, the normativity, the substantial normativity of an institution. So at the end, we are able to perceive these socially created entities as epistemically objective. Within this pattern, within the framework of Searle's analysis of institutions, Cvejić, in the mentioned article of 2009, tells us, for example, the following. A good institution is one in which the individuals realize their interests and also one they can identify with. An institution without life remains an external duress. Such an entity is characterized by rigidity, which can be illustrated by the fact that things that are recalcitrant or do not follow the institutional procedures can no longer enter the institution's field of vision. Here, Cvejić, in the wake of Hegel, who, as I mentioned before, overflies many of the presentations here, recall the reader the fact that institution cannot dispense with the task of always engage a dialogue with the generations, with the societies the institution is speaking to. An institution which loses its internal life, its objective spirit in Hegel's terms, is an institution that fails, is an institution that doesn't work anymore. I'm going to the third part of my presentation and try to conclude this approach. Which institutions for contemporary transformations of labor? An issue, perhaps an issue of democratization. I would like to set some questions here in this third part of my presentation. For example, are still trade unions key bureaucratic reference for guaranteeing political agency to workers? I would like to highlight in this respect that the rise of horizontal workers' organization and grassroots movements aiming to flesh out, for example, labor solidarity, could respond in a critical way to this hegemonic function fulfilled by trade unions in the enlargement, the struggle of enlarging basic social rights to workers. What does it mean to regulate non-standard forms of employment? It entails to become a waged worker and thus to abandon the stage as autonomous worker, or rather to receive legal recognition as a non-standard worker for getting rid of the oppression clause tied to these labor practices. Here I mention, I would like to also bring to the fore the work of González Ricoy and Jael Queralt, a very recent paper, a chapter about non-standard work published in a book co-edited by Deranty, Jean-Philippe Deranty, published by Routledge. Wider Work is the title. A second point regarding this transformation of institutions related to the transformation of labor. We could pay attention to the case of Riders' Law in Spain, issued in August of this year. Companies as Globo, Deliveroo, Uber were enforced through this law to hire and quote as waged workers all their employees. One unwitting effect related to this legal transformation. The companies fired large parts of their platforms workers in Spain or simply quit Spain. Third point, focusing on these patterns of transformation. I would say that the disavowal, for example, of self-responsible statement, which I naturally put in relation with a situated knowledge, as a bureaucratic means, a bureaucratic tool, instead of long and convoluted applications procedures, which always work top down to claim basic social rights, I think this dismissal, this disavowal of self-responsible statement, instead of all these complex forms that nobody knows how to fill out, everybody, I think, has the experience to feel completely unable to fill out correctly forms to ask, for example, basic social benefits. Normally, these forms, this literature, this administrative literature, is very demanding from the subjects, and all of us feel very incapable to understand the whole process. And so what I think is a symptom of ideological outdated patterns is the fact that the public administration is very skeptic of this role that self-responsible statement could play in the demanding process of social basic benefits. For example, we could mention the case of minimum living income in Spain, and we could also bring to the fore how the social security system in Spain, which is highly technified and is now very efficient, but it's a complex institution, was enforced to resort to non-governmental organizations, to NGO, to see, to check who deserves or not to receive this basic public benefit. Why? Because the institution was not able to check, to reach out all the people needing this help, needing this basic income. I think this is also very symptomatic about the capacities and incapacities, the potentiality and impotence of contemporary public institutions. And at last point, and I conclude with this, I will agree with the approaches, the accounts of Deranty and Renaud in a chapter published in this collected book, Wider Work, published by Routledge this year. I will also mention Richard Sennett's Together, this important book about the rationality involved, embodied in the working activity, because I agree with them in the idea that workspaces make us able about the epistemic interdependence we live in. So according to Dewey's conception of democracy, this definition of democracy, where democracy is intended as a way of life, whose main traits is that all those who are affected by social institutions must have a share in producing and managing them. I think this definition of democracy could also be confirmed by very basic, very immediate experiences related to the fact of working. I have always seen working an alternative perspective about what I know and what I ignore, and alternatively, I become aware about which epistemic feedback I need from the others, and which kind of contribution I also can give to others in order to perform a complex work, in order to wave, so to say, a kind of common outcome. So I just wanted to share with you these ideas of an ongoing research, and I will be very, very pleased, very glad of hearing your remarks and your questions later in the discussion. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Nuria, for your terrific presentation, which was very insightful. Now we are moving on to hear Igor Cvejić, who will present a talk titled "Trust as an Invitation to Introduce New Norms or to Change the Existing Ones, Interdependence and Uncertainty." So please, Igor, when you want, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Clara. I will just share the screen. Okay. My today's presentation is, as you could recognize, in some way similar to the problem Serjan addressed, and partly Marian, and it's not about trust and stability as usually is talk about, but rather about uncertainty and insecurity. So I think stability is important for trust, first as a ground of trust, and the second as its consequence. I think that trust is necessarily directed toward some kind of uncertainty. And in my today's lecture, it's not just about it. It is directed to some kind of uncertainty. It's something that we not know yet and that should be, but it's also to this kind of uncertainty that we are speaking to the trust to someone who is not a member of our society, or to someone who we don't actually, for the fact, know that will act in some way. And as in the surgeon lecture yesterday, that the main idea or the main aim of this is to test how the trust function and how it could be useful in a situation of radical social changes, when there is a kind of disruptive contingency, or when there is a rupture in a usual normative order. And what I will argue is that it could be possible by kind of normative, or rather motivational pressure that trust put on the trustees, and thus making a kind of intersubjectivity, or rather invitation to join us, and in a way creating an adaptation of new norms in new situations. Just to be clear that my understanding of communities, institutions, and the norms of communities probably a bit more informal, but I think that even formal institutions function in such way that means that it's dynamical, that the norms we have are not static, they're changing over the time, and that there could be ambiguity about the content of the norm we share. So we are not simply connected by the static norms we adopted. We are connected by many kinds how our interrelationship unfolds. And in these cases, there could be ambiguity. We could think differently about the norms we share, or we are not always clear about what is the content of the norm we share, but we delineate about it. And there could be some situations which require new norms to be adopted, or to change existing one. And most radical of those situations of disruptive contingency, when something's happened that entirely change our order. And you will notice that I'm mostly speaking about emotions here, and it's not probably accidental. I think emotions are good candidates for such situations. So as Matthew Radcliffe argued, emotions presuppose kind of disturbances of our existential world, kind of the rupture in our existential world, or as Ben Zaev argued, the kind of transformation when the old world settings is not anymore applicable and there are no new world settings. So grief is a good example of such an emotion. And I will not say what I think about the trust. It's probably a bit specific understanding of trust. I treat trust as reactive attitude, following Ben and Helm, and most of my thesis here will be directly connected to Helm's thesis, and reactive attitude that are emotional in a wider sense. First, reactive attitudes are attitudes toward other actions or behavior. Resentment is one of typical. Or so, for example, I may have resentment over someone who pushed me in the public transport. So I'm reacting toward something that someone did, and I think together with Helm that trust is such kind of reaction. So we are reacting in a way to the other's reaction. And I say that it's emotional. I don't think it's irrational, certainly. I think it's very rational and intelligible reaction usually, and not just a short-term emotion like anger, fear, or something like it. But what I want to say that it's not just like believing. So if I believe that John will do X correctly, it is not the same to say that I trust John that he will do X correctly. But because when I trust him, there is a specific way how I'm effectively engaged with John, which is not connected to the beliefs. Or it could be based, but it's not reducible to beliefs. And when I say emotional, I don't think it's just kind of private feeling. It's not only something like we feel, but also something we do. So if I get angry to someone who pushed me in a public transport, I will make face gestures, I will look at him, then look at witnesses. And that is something I do and how my anger unfolds. Or probably I will even kick this person. And this is important, I think, for trust, that trust is not only something we feel and not only something we know, certainly, but also something we do. And what we do when we have trust is essentially giving. So we are giving this trust to someone. And even if this giving could be sometimes manifested in a form to leave someone alone. So when I give trust to you and your colleague to do a program for a workshop, probably way of giving this trust is to leave him alone to make this program, and not to making, not to make too many correction of his work. And I think that trust is future-oriented, or better to say forward-looking. It's about something that's going to happen. And I think that we also have here sometimes confusion. So we treat trust as something about presence. So we trust institutions on present. I think the trust is essentially about something that is not yet come. It don't actually necessarily need to be future, but something that is not effective. So I can trust that some institution has done something in the past, but I still don't know it, but it's still forward-looking and not backward-looking. To be clear, probably analogy between cognition could be and emotions here could be of use. So it's more like anticipation than like senses perception. And I think it's important to understand that trust is motivational. It means that it somehow intervenes with a rational motivation of trustee. And here is of importance the difference mentioned in the last 2 days between confidence and trust, and I will say between reliance and trust. So I can rely on network connections that this will go. Yesterday it didn't go well. And I can rely on the government that I will get my salary next week. But to trust someone is different in a way of interacting with his own rational motivation, so that my trust is something as counting on him in such a way that this counting on him became a part of his rational motivation to act in such a way. So to give an example from social life, if I rely on government that I will get my salary, I will probably get disappointed if I didn't get it. But if leftists trusted Syriza and Tsipras to get certain policies, they will not only be disappointed, they will also feel betrayed. And this reaction toward reliance and toward trust is certainly different. And this is a good way to understand motivational role that trust has. So I will come now to something that can call reactive attitudes to explain what reactive attitudes do and what I think is very important for the trust. So the basic Helm idea is that call of reactive attitudes. So this is call I express when expressing reactive attitudes. So for example, my gestures when someone pushed me in a public transport is one kind of a call of reactive attitudes, is normative. So to understand what I term call of reactive attitudes in terms of communication, the function of getting the recipient to take up one's message, is to miss the idea that they are form of price or blame, and so are ways of holding someone responsible, or in the case of self-reactive attitudes, of taking responsibility. This has some important implication. First, reactive call of reactive attitudes and reactive attitudes are generally form of plus and blame, so they put some kind of guilt or price towards someone. And what is important in this way, they imposes the other side to the importance of the event that happened. So when someone pushed me, I'm trying to find, by my reactive attitudes, I'm trying to find a way to address the other side, to see that he did something wrong, and probably to address the witnesses to see that someone did some harm to me. And in this way, I'm stressing the importance of that will happen. Fortunately, it was not so important in this case. And it is usually or commonly based on shared norm and acceptation. So what makes my reactive attitudes warranted is usually that we have some normative expectation how we should behave. And that is the reason why I think it's justified why I blame or prize someone. In this case, we presuppose that there are some normative expectation to be cultural and public transport and not to push other if not necessary. And I'm calling on this norm we share to say that something is wrong. And by doing this, I as entitled the other C as ones who are responsible, be it the witnesses or the one who is the perpetrator. I'm kind of getting again to know that we have some shared norms that should be fulfilled, and that you're responsible for fulfilling it as a member of some kind of society that share these norms. So now to the most important question and some interesting idea in Helm, it is that trust could be used not only in the cases when there is kind of membership or kind of expected norm, but it could be used to non-members or in cases when we don't have adopted norms. So what Helm says is forward-looking, the call of trust can be an invitation to a delineation how it's proper for us to show respect in the face of particular circumstances of dependency, even when this is not simply part of our normative expectation in advance. In such a case, trust presents a view of the import of these circumstances of dependency that propose to be our view, and it calls on the trustee, as well as witnesses, to take up this invitation and respond accordingly. It presses this import on them. I'm not satisfied with a Helm example, so I will try to give my own to make this understand. Let's say that at the beginning of pandemic situation, I started to trust my neighbor. We don't have usually so good relations, but I've started to trust him that he will help me with the supplies if I possibly get in isolation and will need help with the supplies during this time. And I expressed this trust to him, presupposing that I will do the same. So it's a kind of invitation to adopt norms, certainly not a part of our normative expectation that we had in advance, but given that new circumstances of dependency, I'm inviting him to join some kind of new informal community that will, in the ways we could help each other in new circumstances of dependency. So what is important here that this kind of trust, even if it is invitation to someone who with don't in advance could expect to share these norms we are offering to him, entitled to trustee as a fellow member. So by giving this trust, I give some entitlement to my neighbor that he is the trusted person for me in relevant circumstances, and that he could be, at least if he accepts this invite, and respected member of this small community of respect. So I'm giving him some kind of responsibility as a kind of fellow member of community. That is even more see if there is already this kind of community and we are offering the trust to someone who is non-member. By this way, we stress the importance of new circumstances. So what I actually do is that I'm finding a kind and motivational way to say that we have some new circumstances of dependency to which we have to react and find a way to shape our normative framework to react correctly to these new challenges. And it is important that it is to do it in motivational and non-offensive way. So motivational because trust is generally kind of a price and offering. So I actually give him an entitlement and intervene in his rational motivation to act in some way. And it's non-offensive in a sense that probably could reject this trust. But it is now open question, and it's open one of the crucial problems, and that is the question of trustworthiness. So it seems that it worked well, but the question could be why I trust my neighbor who I probably don't know well, or why I trust to someone who is no member, or in a situation of crisis, why I trust to someone who don't know. And even in Helm, this problem is visible. So after some discussion, he defined trustworthiness as, you may see, I will not read it all, but crucial to trustworthiness is that someone is a member, fellow member of community of respect. So what it means that the basis why we treat someone as trustworthy is that we have some kind of normative expectation that are part of our already established interpersonal relation. And I trust him because of that, and not because I know that he will do something in some way, but we have some part rationally interconnected in the type of relation we have, which grant the reason for him to act in a way that I will hold trustworthy. So if I have good friendship with someone and we always meet at Friday at 5, I trust him that he will came at Friday at 5, not only because what kind of person he is, but because this is something embedded in our friendship. And here are two problems that I immediately come from this, and that is why we trust a non-member. If the reason that someone is trustworthy is that he's kind of fellow member of our relation, and is this trust unwelcome then for non-member? Because if I offer my neighbor a trust that he will bring me supplies, he could probably feel offended by that fact, and could probably feel that I'm asking too much and that I'm doing it in a way that seems kind but is not. So to give an example of unwelcome trust, so for example, a chief of the cathedral could trust the junior student to bring him a coffee every day. So, but this trust may be unwelcome because junior student probably doesn't find correct that normative expectation is that he brings the coffee every day to the chief. And I want to add, coming to the finish, I want to add some addition why I think that even without this work, one way to answer it could be sorry, do you see presentation? I just got message from Nuria. Do you see these 4 points?
I see just the first slide.
Oh, that's problematic. Okay, I'll try to do it again. If not, then I will just speak wider. Okay, I already come to an end. I hope it was at least understandable even without it. So I will now just specify some addition to the argument why even in the case when there is not such kind of trustworthiness grounded in knowledge how some kind of epistemic evidence how one will act or in existing relations, there could be intelligible to trust someone. One idea to answer is that there are always some kind of common grounds. So I don't probably have good relation with my neighbor, but we still have some kind of relation. We know each other. We are part of this building. So probably this kind can function as always coming to some communication, but I think it's something that's empirically important and that happens, but I don't think it's a good answer. The second answer that is probably common in social ontology, and it's not very complex, is that in this case, you just try and see. You give an invitation and see if other will respond, and that is all you can do. For example, that's several answer how status functions come into the function. And I don't think either that this is good answer, but I think it's important to keep it in mind because I think this offer has to remain open. It is important to emphasize that invitation of trust is not a demand in a sense that I want to close discussion or that I want to put pressure on someone to have to respond, but that just to kindly offer him something. And one important solution could be to speak about differently about trust, and the discussion about therapeutic trust is important here. So if we keep in stick with that trustworthiness is a necessary condition in a strong sense for having trust, it seems a bit weird when we think about therapeutic trust. Therapeutic trust, classical example will be a mother who trusts or give and express trust to her daughter that he will came home by midnight, even having enough epistemic evidence that it will not happen. And this trust put a kind of pressure to the daughter, but it would be simply wrong just to say that this kind of trust is intelligible. And it's work. So the daughter will think about herself as a trustful person and probably have a part of rational motivation to came home before midnight. And in this case, that is not how it works with trustworthiness, but Victoria Maguire addressed, and I think it's important here, what is enough to treat therapeutic trust as intelligible and appropriate is that trustee is at least capable of being trust, and that he or she could recognize the situation, and that there is some kind of connection of values. So in this case, between mother and daughter, there is some kind of interaction of values. And I think it could be applied also here. So what is important in trusting in situation of uncertainty is that other person is at least capable of trust, and that he could at least recognize a situation, new circumstances, and dependency, and that in this process, we have some connection of values. So we give a way to connect our values with this person's values. And also that in such a cases, primarily in a situation of disruptive contingency, like pandemic situation, that it is primarily directed not about existing norms, but about circumstances or dependencies. What we mostly want to stress is that circumstances changes, but finding you reasonable person, I expect that you also recognize that there are new circumstances and that we should delineate about it. So what I offering you is not a kind of static norm that you should accept, but offer to delineate about new norm in new circumstances on dependency. And I will just briefly finish. I know that my time is run out. I will not so much speak about affective scaffolding. So I think it's form of affective scaffolding is a structure that provide kind of rational motivation to others to react. And it's mostly, it could be understand not a way of reading other mind. So I think I should trust someone I know what he will do and what he will think. And I think in such situation that is kind of defeatist approach, but offering an optimistic relation to the other through invitation to the other in a situation of new circumstances. I'll finish here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Igor, for your very instructive presentation. And now, last panelist, we have Andrea Perenovic, who will speak about money towards a critique of the fundamental institution of social trust. He's a research associate in the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory of Belgrade. And please, when you want, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clara. Hello to everyone once again. I wanted, just as the last panelist, to express my gratitude for this marvelous workshop, to all the panelists and to the conveners. Some very important questions on trust were raised and unfolded. And I want to express a regret, and that is that I prepared a presentation on money, and I regret now that I didn't prepare a more maybe general account on trust, having in mind that I wrote a thesis on that notion and working for years on that. But when I was reading the text which was preparing this workshop, I just concentrated on the notion of the institution. So I thought maybe money was a fundamental institution of social trust. So that's what life is. You will have my presentation on money, and I will just now start. So in one highly cynical assertion from decades ago, the infamous American industrialist Henry Ford states that, I quote, "It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning." Unluckily, we need to admit, despite all of his arrogance, Ford was right. And he still is, because even when capitalism progressed from Fordism to its post-Fordist models, we still don't clearly perceive what money is. So the question that I will try to formulate today asks nothing less than, what is money? And what has money to do with trust? And I can give you a little hint. I can already disclose it. It has everything to do with trust. But first of all, how come that something we all use on a daily basis and highly depend on remains ontologically and epistemologically unclear, obscure, to say? From the epistemological point of view, we could say that this presumed veil of mystery that envelops the phenomenon of money is artificially sustained by myths. The main one being the myth that we encounter usually in the economical textbooks, which says that money is a mere instrument or medium of exchange, a unit of account, an invention that transparently facilitates the exchange and evaluation of goods. But this very myth is preceded by yet another one, the myth of barter, the underlying myth of all dominant economical theories, from Adam Smith to Joseph Stiglitz. As David Graeber explains in his book on debt, the myth of barter is strongly defined by historians and anthropologists. It promotes that in human societies, there was barter in the first place, then money was invented, and at last, the idea of credit took the central place in our economies. Graeber shows with historical precision exactly the opposite, namely that historical documents testify how credit systems already existed in Mesopotamia or ancient Egypt, while the metallic money was invented a few thousand years after. In that sense, barter appears only as a side effect of those two phenomena, of credit and money. This is why today I would like to speak to you about money as credit, about the so-called fiduciary or fiat money, about money as a fundamental institution of social trust. Now, from the ontological point of view, I shall try to convince you, to use ironically yet another term pertaining to the discourses of trust, that money is a knot in which all relations of social trust tightly intertwine. We can provocatively assume, in a Lacanian fashion maybe, that a knot is nothing, a shape without content. Knot, as the fastening of relation is, it exists. But we could say that this knot with a K is also nothing without K. The object knot with a K is nothing without K. But it is also nothing with the K, the action of making knots. Following this wordplay, which is, in my view, not devoid of sense, we can propose that money is a quasi-object, quasi-subject, pertaining to the realm between being and nothingness. The nothing without K of the knot is thus a lack, an ontological gap which emerges as some kind of a black hole, sucking in all social trust. So, if we say that money is a quasi-object, quasi-subject, yet another thinker comes to our mind, another French thinker, namely Sartre, who looked at value as being in itself, for itself, all in one breath, the impossible synthesis to which the unhappy consciousness, la conscience malheureuse, longs to inextricably. So if we translate that, we humans, as evaluators, are all in some kind of a rat race for money, that the point in which all those unreachable values meet each other, no matter if we want it or not. Therefore, without credit, without social trust that the phenomenon of money provides, practically all political and socio-economic systems through human history, and especially in capitalism, individuals and societies would cease to exist, literally. Debt has its important role to play in that process, but we should see that later on. So those are some of our introductory onto-axiological premises about money. But what I want to bring to the table today is the idea that money is all about credit, and that as such, it represents a fundamental institution of social trust. In order to reflect on the ontological and epistemological questions that we have just posed, we should attempt a detour, which will lead us to some very concrete and more empirical aspects of money. For this, we should avoid what is called pure economy, an economy that characterizes money simply as a medium of exchange, reserve of value, etc. Because there is a number of other important factors that determine the complex phenomenon of money. So firstly, when I say that money is basically credit, that claim has historical and economic explanations. Like Graeber suggests, the periods when value of money was rooted in the consensually pre-given value of precious metals like gold and silver, like it was the case for the American dollar with the gold standard until Nixon had put an end to it, and the periods when money was rooted solely in trust, that its users were according to it, have substituted one another throughout history. At least for the last 50 years, let's say, we're living in an era of a purely fiat money, of fiduciary money, that is even significantly less than before in need of its minimal materiality, like liquidity, cash engendered in materially, in paper bills or metallic coins. We are neither anymore in need of elaborate symbolic ornamentations. Money thus became nothing else but an electronic blip on some bank server. But if money is almost nothing, even in the material sense, in which sense it could be a naught with a K, where all those social relations of trust intertwine? That's where the heterodox economic theories of regulation come into play. Michel Alieta and André Orléans, two left-wing French economists, propose that money is, I quote, that money, I quote, express and sustain global values of a given society. And moreover, that money in modern societies stays the expression of society as totality. It keeps its status of the operator of social belonging. So money produces and organizes relations of trust in a particular society, thanks to the very trust that its individuals are according to it. Likewise, redundantly, trust responds to trust, engendering some kind of a general credit. But furthermore, Alieta explains that trust in money is primordial because of the ambivalent nature of it. Money is a public good, but contradictory, it can become a private property, thus becoming everyone's object of desire. This is precisely where trust intervenes. And now I must quote Alieta extensively from his book, Money Between Debt and Sovereignty. Trust in money is a collective attitude, therefore an implicit institution, which conjures the corrosive forces of ambivalence. To have trust in money means to recognize the durable advantages that the efficiency of rules of payments systems provide to each and every participant of the economy regulated by a specific monetary system. That presupposes a recognition of money as a public good, and by consequence, a prevention of abuse of private appropriation of liquidity. To have trust in money means to consider the monetary order as legitimate. And the monetary order considered as a whole is a public good, and it is by nature political. It is a question of trust in a given collectivity. It is fundamentally an ethical norm that recognizes the legitimacy of the emitting and regulating institution of the ultimate liquidity, end of quote. So, when we look at the monetary order, besides its economic determination, we have to take into account this ethical norm, this moral basis, which appears as a regulatory agency in respect to arbitrary powers in society. Alieta claims, referring himself to Georg Simmel, that trust in money has the virtue to contain tensions, frustrations, and rivalry engendered by the society of the free concurrent individuals. Here we come to yet another collective book edited by the same two authors, Allieta and Orléans, entitled Sovereign Money, in which we find texts not only by economists, but also by anthropologists, psychoanalysts, or linguists, and in whose introduction the editors divide trust in three hierarchically organized forms. Besides exposing them, we shall try now to compare we shall try to compare those three types of trust in money to three traditional ways in we understand debt, thus exposing the anti-humanist exoskeleton of credit, the debt as the darker side of trust in money. So let's start from the hierarchically lowest type of trust in money, the methodical trust. This kind of trust ensures security of relations between actors, of payments in the given monetary system. It proceeds by repeating the acts of same nature, payments, that all lead to successful exchange. Hence, routine is the basis of this kind of trust in money. The simple regularity of payments make possible the emergence of patterns for future actions. This kind of social credit that we recognize in money responds to what Marcel Henaf calls cosmic debt, referring himself to Anaximander. Cosmic debt represents a flaw in the temporal equilibrium that goes against the imperative following which all beings have to accept the timely order to chronotaxis, the proper temporal lot, the passing of the lot to the other, the substitution which must be respected. A famous example of a figure who haven't respected the cosmic debt is Oedipus, who by returning to his mother's womb have upset the temporal order and the imperative of the cosmic debt. In the sense that cosmic debt constitutes the interdiction of incest, the methodic trust forbids the counterfeit that would disturb the monetary temporal order, or, for example, the destruction of cash. So, for example, burning paper bills or melting coins is still forbidden in many countries for the same reasons, although this interdiction becomes more and more obsolete because of the growing loss of importance of materiality. In this way, methodic trust projects values in time, giving the basic security for their future development. The second type of trust in money is called hierarchical trust. Its task consists in transforming the other into the big other, in attributing him a sovereign status. So hierarchical trust in money transforms the relation to others into a social relation which is hierarchically constructed as so to confirm the existence of a sovereign instance to which all must obey. In the concrete context of monetary orders, the hierarchical trust appears in the form of an institution which sets the rules of using money, emits liquidity, and guarantees the quality of monetary relations in their entirety, their conformity to the given rules. The hierarchical trust in money seems to respond to what the same author, Marcel Henaf, in his book, The Price of Truth, de la Prix de la Vérité, calls the constitutive debt. This kind of debt finds its conceptual origins in ancient India, in the Vedic culture, and represent literally the debt of life that each and every one owes to the god of death called Yama. Without going further into details, I will just say that to reimburse the constitutive debt means to sacrifice oneself, but not just anyhow, but by firstly living a life according to the Holy Scriptures, to procreate so the debt is transmitted to the next generation, and finally to die, of course, ritually. The credit that flows from this kind of debt is nothing else but life. Life is a credit, the credit of life, a credit for life, a lifelong credit. So in the context of hierarchical trust in money and monetary institutions, subjects give up their own sovereignty, they sacrifice it ritually by using money and thus according credit to a flawless authority, which in return guarantees the stability of social relations. Finally, the highest form of trust in money is named by Alieta and Orléans the ethical trust. And I quote, "In our highly individualistic societies, the ethical position obtains a superior status in comparison to social and interpersonal positions recognized by hierarchical trust, because it supposes superiority of the value of human person as being above any other social element. There is a tight link between the preponderance of the ethical trust and the autonomy acquired by the market economy through the development of capitalism. The human person is projected in through a permanent pursuit of happiness which keeps on escaping it. The ethical trust in money, if we are to continue our analogy, responds to what could be named the debt event. Marcel Enaf situates this type of debt in Christian tradition. It is a debt in front of God. The very first figures of debtors that had this kind of debtor, namely Adam and Eve. This debt is thus also related to culpability, guilt, fault, and it calls for redemption. Just think of Nietzsche's analogy between debt and guilt, like schuldig and schuld. Okay, I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing it well. But what is important that in ethical trust in money, this redemption is not possible. As Walter Benjamin writes in his short essay, Capitalism as a Religion, capitalism is a religion of guilt without possible redemption. And so the illusory individualist autonomy, as well as the ethical trust in money, represent expressions of the very guilt which is central to the capitalist ideology. If the ethical trust responds to the debt event, and thus guilt responds to guilt. And we seem to be testifying here to an obvious redundancy, a mere nothing, to use the ontological vocabulary from the beginning, which is engendered in money. So the nothing is engendered in money. Trust and trust, nothing. The gap created by this redundancy suck in its hermeneutic totality all phenomena of social relations and turns them into credit, the single mean of remaining useful for the pursuit of ever-escaping happiness. The notion of hierarchical and ethical trust in money exceed, as we just saw, significantly the economic frame of the concept of money, which already in the economic field is fairly complex. And this we could claim is a reason why money keeps on being epistemologically so obscure. On the other hand, they assume that money is reflecting not only our economic reality, but also our subjective and social existence in all its complexity. So that the question, why and how do we trust in money, could resume itself to a simple question, why and how do we trust at all? My answer to this to this question is rather gloomy and risks to be extensive. And I think I'm running out of time anyway. So maybe we could address it during the discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so thank you, Andrea, very much for sticking yourself to the time, because I was just about to write you a private message about the time consuming. So thank you very much. And now we have about half an hour to discuss the interventions. So if someone wants to pose a question, please raise your hand. If not, I will break the ice and start with
Gonzalo Marcel.
Gonzalo
Raise his hand.
No, but go ahead, Clara. Go ahead, and
no, please, Gonzalo, go ahead. I can speak later.
Okay. Yeah, just maybe also breaking the ice. So thank you very much for all three presentations, which were wonderful. It was a great panel. I think I have questions for all three, but I'll stick to Nuria and Igor, and maybe I can speak with Andrea later. So to Nuria, just I think the first remark is just out of curiosity, because I was always very struck by the Spanish permanent problem with unemployment. I mean, comparing it with Portugal. I mean, Spain has better living standards, better salaries, etc., and still so-called structural unemployment, which is way higher than Portugal's or even Italy's and other countries in Southern Europe. And I am just wondering why. And I was always with the suspicion that somehow this could be avoided, but is not. And actually, this provides one argument for the neoliberal push towards precisely part-time work, etc., etc. And just as a second comment, I was just wondering. I mean, in light of all you've said about the bureaucratic ideology tied to, you know, means-tested conditional schemes of aid, of social aid, and the problems they have in not being able to reach everyone who needs, and also given the fact that unions are really weak right now in not being able to encompass the claims of many of the precarious workers who don't have just one job or don't have a fixed job identity, etc. If one, one alternative way to empower these people would be not only through, you know, the democratic, the democratic agency provided by traditional full-time work, etc., but also alternative schemes like basic income and stuff like that, who really empowers people in a different way. And to Igor, just a very short, I would say, bibliographic remark, because I liked very much your presentation. It kind of reminded me of what Ricoeur, of whom I spoke yesterday, speaks about mutual recognition, in which has been compared to Fichte's notion of summons, and which is the following. Ricoeur criticizes a little bit the traditional scheme of the struggle for recognition associated with Hegel and neo-Hegelian accounts, because he says that within this model of reciprocal recognition, it is as if we are really demanding recognition of others before we recognize ourselves, the others. And so it's kind of like a logic of obligation within reciprocity. So it proposes that we conceive of recognition as mutual instead of reciprocal, saying that in the notion of mutuality, I recognize the other first, kind of in the hope and creating the normative framework for him or herself to recognize me back. So I kind of invite him to recognize me back. And so I thought that this was very close in a way to what we were saying about trust. And so the book of Ricoeur is the course of recognition. So this might be interesting for you to reflect on also what you're saying about trust and the relations between trust and recognition, etc. Sorry if this was long.
I think the speakers might answer, and then we can collect more questions.
Okay, thank you, Gonzalo, for the two remarks. I will say with regard with this, what you call the structural unemployment situation in Spain, I will say that naturally in Spain we have some from long time since some decades. Since democracy, as I mentioned before, came back to this country to key economic drives in our social structure. The one is hostelry, the bars, restaurants, the tourism. The second one is real estate companies, which also contributed in a very important rate to the increase of the prices of housing in Spain. So these two economic drives, I think in a very natural way, they lead to a structural unemployment, because they are they change very much through the time. They are always short time intended. They provide work, jobs, but always under this pattern of short-term employment. So it's very difficult to harmonize the goals and the tenets of this kind of economic activity and the goals and the tenets of a fair negotiation in the field of employment. So the political agenda of different, driven by, ruled by different parties here in Spain, was always suffering this kind of structural contradiction. This could be my prompt answer, my prompt reply to this very important question. I didn't know that you in Portugal have more luck with the unemployment rates, but it's good to hear that. And perhaps you could explain to us, to your neighbors, how to struggle, how to grapple with this very ingrained social programs we have in the employment, in the field of employment. And regarding the second one, Remark, your mention of a basic income as an alternative to provide with social aid to needy people, to vulnerable people. I precisely mentioned, I fully agree with your remark. I think it's a very inspiring path, this of providing with a basic income to these social groups. And I precisely mentioned these problems that many people, immigrants, but not only immigrants, I will include myself in the people that has problems to fill out this kind of forms. I mentioned this case because this minimum vital aid issued by the Spanish government in the hottest period of the pandemic crisis caused many problems to the subjects of the aid, because they didn't know how to manage the forms, but also many of them had not, for example, census certificates. to prove that they were residents in Spain in the year they demanded this social aid. And the social workers were not able to help them to manage with these very complex forms, and the social system was forced, as I said, to recur on the help of NGO sectors, because they have a more concrete knowledge of these groups, of these people. Naturally, if a basic income will create the same problems or analogous problems to the one I mentioned with this minimal vital aid, I think the difficulties will arise once more, because the problem is the mediation. For example, I could put my own experience with how to ask for the public administration here in Spain a social aid for dependent people. My aunt is dependent people, is a resident in a nursing home. And from 2 years, I'm trying to help her to obtain this aid, this income, especially targeted to vulnerable people. And it's impossible for me, that I have an academic trajectory, to overcome the difficulty of not having the census certification of last 2 years in Spain. She paid taxes, she had house, but the public administration does not acknowledge she was officially resident in Spain. And these Kafkaesque situations are very, very difficult to manage, because they create an extra social suffering that I think we could spare, getting and furnishing an enlarged sense of what institutional patterns are. Thank you for your remarks.
Okay, so Igor, please.
Thank you, Gonzalo. I'm not so familiar with Reactive, but from what you said, it is certainly on the same trace, and I will try to look at Reactive. And if I may, I'll just add that, yeah, exactly that was one of my main ideas, to go from this story of demanding to some story of offering an invitation. And I think it's when understanding social changes, it is both now strategically and scientifically important, because I'm afraid that both strategically, at least those, let's say, no populist options are a bit in delusion when acting. So acting in a way that they actually don't give a trust to those who should act, and in this way practically stop a way for them to integrate. And I think also scientifically, because I think it's a part of putting too strong epistemic demands to the possible actors, and then if they are not fulfilled, saying that we shouldn't have possible attitudes or for acting in the future. And I try to offer a different account, in a sense in which positive attitude toward others could be given, in a sense that you create some kind of environmental structure that could help others to feel rationally motivated to act in some way. So probably the recognition is the same, but you now have some connection with the other who are encouraged to act in some way. Thank you.
Okay, so if nobody wants to pose another question, I will.
There is also Sergen, but
yeah, I'm sorry. Sergen, please.
You can ask if you want.
No. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Okay, I have some questions for all the panelists. First of all, thanks for a really great panel. So, Nuria, this is more a comment than a question, but I think when we speak about, you know, gig economy and these new platforms that are emerging and that are, you know, initializing this kind of flexibilization of work, we have to have in mind, it seems to me, this weird fact that these platforms like Glovo, Uber, and stuff like that, in which those people who work are engaged with, usually subsidize our, you know, lifestyle. So they start as really lucrative plans at the start, so that they can, you know, enclose on people, so that they can trap people into their platforms. And then afterwards, all the negative stuff occurs. So it seems to me that, and it's really tough to see how this kind of consumerism, in which we have this kind of, you know, like really relaxed lifestyles in which we can order stuff and get, you know, subsidized, you know, services of taxis, plays into the whole neoliberal agenda of total flexibilization of work. And this kind of, there is a good documentary called The Gig Is Up. And if you have a chance, have a look at it. And one of the protagonists of that movie says, if you think that this does not pertain to you, there's an Uber for your job also. And this is also something that I think plays into some of the topics that your presentation tackled. So then, Igor, of course, this is really, really interesting. I love the idea of therapeutic trust. I think that it is really, really important. I also have just a question of, I totally agree with the strategy and the premise. However, I was just wondering how would this scale? So how would we go from, you know, something which Charles Tilly calls thick trust, which implies, you know, close interpersonal relationships, onto a thin trust, which implies that you have groups that are not based even on national level, but international level, and which, you know, have, for example, some kind of therapeutic trust, but they are not usually like based within, they are not generated through close interpersonal relations. And at the end, Andrea, I want to just, as you know, I come from a different tradition, but I think that some of the stuff that you tackle are really important, and I just want to give you an opportunity to be gloomy, because you promised some gloomy remarks at the end, and unfortunately we didn't have the opportunity to hear them, and I gather that it would be important to hear them. So yeah, thanks all.
Yeah, so go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Serdian, for your remark. I fully agree with this commentary about the influence, the significance that neoliberal transformation of work has in everything I tackle in my presentation, really. I think that authors, essayists as Jonathan Crary or Mark Fisher are naturally engaged with a wider overview of the current contradictions that platforms, jobs display. In this sense, I would just mention this experience, this neoliberal and new experience for humanity, for society, for social agents, of complete overlapping and complete merge of life and job in this kind of employments, in the sense that also the worker is led by the ideological patterns functioning in this typology of employment, to lose the boundaries, the sense of the boundaries between the time, the part of my life in which I'm a worker and I provide supplies, commodities to other people, and the part of the time I'm myself consumer of these platforms. I think this experience is quite novel in the history of society, at least in our continent. But naturally, I think the survey of the neoliberal effects of everything I pointed out about this interaction between the conception of work, of contemporary work, and the conception of institutions. I think this survey is completely necessary to sum up and to draw conclusions about what I'm trying to research in this path. Okay, thank you.
Okay, it's certainly a very hard question, thinking practically how it happens. But I have to say that I don't, theoretically, at least I don't see that there is any specific issue with trust. So for example, in comparison with the beliefs and how they share in these cases, and I think it's much more easier actually. So two things are important. One is that at the end, I wanted to treat this kind of trust. So it's generally invitation to join us, however formulated, and it is kind of affective scaffolding that is in some sense environmental social structure that supports or regulates our emotions. So it exists, let's say, in a social space, in this case of trust. And as such, it could, the second important thing, I don't think that addressee is even a necessary singular person. So I'll try to give two examples, and I think that at least practically helps to answer how it's shared. So ecological movements, maybe even more at the day beginning. So they give trust to their addressees through the internet, through the forums, that you recognize situation and act accordingly. And by the way, they are widening the group. So the group became obviously wider with more members, and some sense of trust between them is added to it. I'm not sure that this kind of trust between them is of the same type as the trust they're giving toward others who are not members. And the second example could be in the coronavirus, this slogan, "Be responsible," who, in my opinion, is just poor form of trying to give trust to someone that he will responsibly act in the case of academic, even without concrete addressee and even generally without concrete context, what actually are the norms, how we should behave in pandemic, but just to remind kindly someone that he is trusted to treat responsibly. And then in the same way as other group are widening, this group could be widened, and in the end we will trust the other who we find that treat pandemic responsibly, let's say not to stay without a mask in an instance. I hope it answers.
Andrea, please.
Okay, Sergeant, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be gloomy, and I will do it. So I must say that I see trust as the main feature of human existence. Actually, in my view, we are all homo fidei. Okay, so it's really, we cannot do without trust. We are just like that. Okay, but is this a good news? Is this something that should be warmly accepted by us, or should we distrust this position? So if you scratch a little bit in the etymology of notions such as trust or confidence, and even more confidence because it leads you to fides, pistis, and faith, you will see some very interesting things. You will see that there are layers of meanings which are obedience, persuasion, domination, solidity, all of which we can find the explanation how we as trusting animals are being dominated by ourselves. So that's one point. And then the other point is that I see the trust, problematic as it is, as namely, first thing is that it overtakes and totalizes all of our subjective existence. So our rational part cannot do without trust. Our unconscious part of being even less, okay? So you have a series of problems then. The second thing is that it totalizes and overtakes, trust overtakes all the social realm through its principle of values. We are evaluating everything. We're spending our times on evaluations. Values are some kind of fundamental category of our social being, and we are trying to build our house on the sand. You know, like values I won't go into details now, but this is also a problem. The third point that I have to make is that we're often have this problem with this dialectic of trust and mistrust. I often hear people saying, like, using as synonyms mistrust, and distrust. I see those two as completely different categories. Actually, mistrust, in my view, should be understood as trust with negative prefix, as trust is only a richer category, one which brings the negation in, but actually is the same thing as trust. As though distrust, and there I propose that that maybe this is the whole other term that could make a difference. Distrust actually represents some kind of putting into relation of trust and mistrust on the other hand, and making trust to disappear, to dissolve in thought. Actually, my gloomy point of view, just to conclude, is that trust is going always against thought and thinking. When we are believing, when we are trusting, it's maybe not like annulating or completely erasing the thought, but it's certainly debilitating it. So since we cannot do without trust, maybe the best thing would be, and that is my point of view, to adopt some kind of a distrustful perspective where we could where we would be aware of things that we trust and things that we mistrust, and putting this in some kind of a dialectical relation, some kind of a reflection of those two, in that echo produced will maybe, that echo that is produced can maybe be a ground for some kind of a new, not new, but more emancipatory thinking that the mere trust provides.
Okay, so thank you very much, Andrea, for your gloomy considerations. And we run out of time. So aside from thanking the panelists for their interventions, I want to give the last word to Nuria Sánchez as a covenant of the whole gathering, in case she wants to say some closing remarks.
Okay, I just really would like to thank you all, the speakers, the attendees, because it was a very helpful workshop once more in this third time. I was really very glad to stay in touch with the lines of research you are developing in the Institute. And I perceive also in this workshop that we share many interests and approaches and accounts. And I think it will worthwhile to stay in touch and to keep this contact, and also continue to develop it with new ideas and new projects. For example, I will say, just to encourage you to engage in new cooperations, we could think, the speakers, but not only, to organize, to work out a proposal of a special issue based in the concept of trust, from more theoretical approaches, but also from the point of view of more empirical studies, as we heard here in the workshop, and send this proposal, as said, to a journal, to a well-ranked journal, if it is possible, because we are always controlled through these assessment categories we have to respond to. And this kind of proposal, a special issue, will allow us to send our papers once we have they ready, but also to count on people that is not here. I will convey to you my disposal, my good disposal to work in this, and thank you once more, because it was a terrific today's workshop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nuria. I think we can say we can trust you to speak in name of all of us because of your words. And I'm going to give the last word also to Adriana, who is the other covenant of this gathering. So please, Adriana, when you want.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you, Nuria, and thank you, everybody. This is a very brief closing remark. I was thinking when we met in Belgrade, so when we were opening the Belgrade workshop in 2019, I was then trying to think of the commonalities and how to make this meeting now for the third time as something which exceeds the mere meeting of two groups of people who have something together, joined in the sense of philosophy and social theory. And I think that would be also a great thing for us to think about, that, you know, if not what was there for us when we met already for the first time, what is it that we created in these three joint workshops, and how this now can be also presented in what Nuria mentioned as a kind of a special issue section. What is it that is just the product of some workshop that we did together, or some meeting, but does it also have some kind of deeper meaning, or some kind of some more commonalities that we can offer and share? Thank you very much. It was really a wonderful 2 days.
Okay, so thank you all for your presentations.
Thank you.
And have a good day. Thank you very much. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.